Detective Sergeant Robert Hayes woke up that Saturday morning feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Actual excitement about having nothing to do. For the first time in what seemed like forever, his phone wasn't buzzing with case updates, witness calls, or emergency briefings. He'd finally caught a break after wrapping up 3 massive investigations back to back. And his captain had practically ordered him to take the weekend off before he burned out completely. Robert had been planning this garage sale for weeks. His house had become a storage unit over the past 15 years, stuffed with things he'd collected, never used, and completely forgotten about. There were old couches that seemed comfortable when he bought them, but had never quite fit right. Boxes of books he'd sworn he'd read someday. A weight bench that served mostly as a very expensive clothes hanger. Kitchen gadgets he'd bought during late-night shopping sprees. Sports equipment from hobbies he'd tried for exactly 2 weeks before life got too busy. The stuff just kept piling up, and he figured it was time to let it all go to people who'd actually use it. He'd spent the entire previous evening setting everything up. Tables borrowed from his brother lined the driveway. Items were organized by category and priced reasonably. He even made neat little signs with bright markers. By 7 in the morning, he had everything ready to go, and by 8, the first customers started rolling in. The morning turned out better than he'd expected. His neighbors were friendly, stopping by not just to shop but to chat and catch up. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 doors down bought the old coffee table for her daughter's first apartment. The college kid who rented the house across the street grabbed the weight bench, genuinely excited about finally having home gym equipment. A young couple negotiated on the couch set, and Robert practically gave it to them when they mentioned they were furnishing their first place together. It felt good. Normal. Like he was just a regular guy having a regular Saturday instead of someone who spent most of his time dealing with the worst things people do to each other. Around 10 in the morning, Robert was helping an elderly man load some gardening tools into his truck when he heard a car engine rev louder than necessary. He turned to see a silver BMW pull up to the curb with the kind of aggressive parking that suggested the driver believed they owned not just the spot, but the entire street. The door swung open and out stepped a woman Robert recognized immediately, though he'd never actually spoken to her, Patricia Cunningham. Every neighborhood had someone like her, and unfortunately for Robert and his neighbors, she was theirs. She was probably in her mid-50s, always dressed like she was heading to a business meeting even on weekends, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from never being genuinely challenged on anything. Robert had received her little notes before. Passive-aggressive reminders printed on HOA letterhead about his grass being slightly too long or his garbage cans being visible from the street for 20 minutes past the allowed time. He'd ignored most of them, figured they weren't worth the energy. But Patricia wasn't holding a note today. She was clutching a thick leather binder, the kind lawyers carry into court, and her expression was one of pure righteous anger. She didn't walk up his driveway. She marched like a general approaching a battlefield. Heels clicking against the pavement with sharp, deliberate strikes. Robert thanked the elderly man, wished him well with the tools, and turned to face whatever was coming. He'd dealt with armed suspects, hostile witnesses, and department politics. Surely he could handle one angry neighbor. Patricia didn't bother with hello. She didn't ask how he was doing or comment on the nice weather. She stopped about 3 feet from him, positioned herself like she was about to deliver a speech, and launched right into it. "This needs to stop immediately," she announced, her voice loud enough that several customers turned to look. "You are in direct violation of our community standards and HOA regulations. I'm here to inform you that you need to pack all of this up right now." Robert blinked. He'd been expecting maybe a comment about blocking the sidewalk or having too many cars parked on the street. But shutting down the entire sale? "I'm sorry, I don't understand," Robert said calmly. "I checked the HOA rules before setting this up. Garage sales are allowed twice a year as long as you give 48 hours notice, which I did. I sent the email on Thursday morning." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. She opened her binder with a dramatic flourish and started flipping through pages. "Your interpretation of the rules is incorrect," she said, not looking up from her papers. "Section 7, Paragraph 3 clearly states that any exterior display of household items constitutes an unsightly presentation that degrades property values. Section 12 prohibits commercial activity in residential zones. What you're doing here violates both." A young couple who'd been looking at his collection of kitchen stuff awkwardly set down what they were holding and started backing toward their car. Robert noticed other browsers suddenly finding reasons to leave too. The atmosphere had shifted from pleasant and relaxed to tense and uncomfortable. "With all due respect," Robert said, keeping his voice even, "those sections don't apply to permitted garage sales. The garage sale provision specifically exempts temporary sales from those rules. That's the whole point of having a garage sale policy." Patricia finally looked up from her binder and Robert could see her jaw tighten. She wasn't used to people disagreeing with her, especially not calmly and with actual knowledge of the rules. "Your email notification was insufficient," she declared, switching tactics. "It didn't include a complete inventory of items for sale. It didn't specify exact hours and it wasn't submitted through the proper portal. Therefore, it doesn't count as valid notice, which means this sale is unauthorized." Robert took a slow breath. He'd read the HOA rules carefully specifically to avoid this kind of situation. There was nothing in there about detailed inventories or special portals. Just a simple requirement to notify the HOA board 48 hours in advance via email, which he'd done. "The rules don't require any of that," Robert said. "I followed the notification process exactly as written." Patricia snapped her binder shut. The sound was sharp, final, meant to signal that the discussion was over. "I'm informing you officially that you are in violation," she said, her voice taking on an edge. "If you don't shut this down within the next 10 minutes, you'll be fined $500 per day until you comply. That fine will continue to accumulate until you cease this activity and remove all items from public view. $500 a day for having a garage sale." Robert almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but he could see Patricia was completely serious. She believed she had total authority here, and she was used to people folding the moment she threw around threats of fines and fees. "I'm not shutting down," Robert said simply. "I'm following the rules. If you think I'm not, that's something we can discuss with the HOA board at the next meeting." Patricia's face started changing color, a flush creeping up from her neck. "You think you can just ignore community standards? You think the rules don't apply to you?" "I think the rules do apply to me," Robert replied, "which is why I followed them." Several of his neighbors had stopped what they were doing entirely now, watching the confrontation unfold. Robert could see Mrs. Rodriguez on her porch, phone in hand, clearly ready to record if things escalated further. Patricia pulled out her cell phone and held it up like a weapon. "Since you refuse to comply with HOA authority, I'm calling the police. They can explain to you what happens when you trespass on HOA-controlled property and engage in illegal commercial activity." Now Robert did smile, just a little. He couldn't help it. The irony was too perfect. "You should do whatever you think is appropriate," he said calmly. Patricia's fingers flew across her phone screen, and moments later she had it pressed to her ear, her free hand on her hip in a power pose. Robert could hear the faint ringing, then someone answering. "Yes, I need police here immediately," Patricia said, her voice dripping with urgency. "I have a situation with a homeowner conducting illegal commercial operations. He's being belligerent and refusing to comply with community standards. This is a residential neighborhood and he's creating a public disturbance." She gave Robert's address, emphasized the word immediately 2 more times, and ended the call with a satisfied nod. She looked at Robert like she'd just played a winning hand in poker. "They'll be here in minutes," she said, "and then we'll see who's right about the rules." Robert just nodded. "Okay," he said. "We'll wait for them then." He went back to organizing his tables, straightening price tags, acting like nothing unusual was happening. Patricia stood at the end of his driveway, arms crossed, binder clutched to her chest like a shield, absolutely certain that she was about to watch Robert get exactly what he deserved. The wait for the police felt longer than it actually was. Patricia stood at the end of Robert's driveway like a security guard, occasionally checking her watch and glancing down the street. She'd position herself to block anyone who tried to browse Robert's stuff, informing them loudly that this was an illegal operation and they'd be wise to move along. Most people just looked confused and left. A few neighbors lingered on their porches, sensing something interesting was about to happen. Robert kept busy reorganizing items that didn't need reorganizing. He was calm on the outside, but inside he was running through how this was going to play out. He knew exactly which officers were probably going to respond. This neighborhood fell under the East District, and on a Saturday morning it would likely be one of 2 patrol units. Either way, he'd worked with most of them at some point. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a detective, sergeant with 15 years on the force, waiting for patrol officers to respond to a call about his garage sale. 15 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up slowly, lights off but clearly responding to the call. Patricia immediately straightened up, smoothed her blazer, and prepared to greet them with her most authoritative expression. The car doors opened, and out stepped officers Tom Rodriguez and Jennifer Kim. Robert recognized them instantly. Rodriguez had helped him on a breaking and entering case just last month, and Kim had provided excellent testimony in a robbery trial Robert had worked on earlier that year. Patricia didn't give them a chance to assess the situation. She rushed over before they'd even closed their car doors, already talking. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness mixed with urgency. "I am Patricia Cunningham, the Community Standards Liaison for this HOA. This man," she pointed dramatically at Robert, "is conducting an illegal commercial operation in direct violation of our residential community standards. I've asked him multiple times to cease and desist, and he's been completely belligerent and dismissive of proper authority." Rodriguez and Kim exchanged a quick glance. Robert caught the slight raise of Rodriguez's eyebrow. They started walking up the driveway, and that's when Rodriguez got a clear look at who Patricia was complaining about. "Sergeant Hayes?" Rodriguez said, his professional mask slipping for just a second into surprise. Patricia's head whipped around. "You know this man?" "Ma'am, if you could just give us a moment," Kim said politely, stepping past Patricia. Robert gave them a small nod. Rodriguez, "Kim, sorry you got called out here on a Saturday." "What's going on?" Rodriguez asked, though his tone suggested he already had a pretty good idea this was going to be ridiculous. "Having a garage sale," Robert said simply, gesturing to his tables. "Sent notification to the HOA Thursday morning, followed all the rules. Ms. Cunningham here believes I'm in violation." Kim was already walking the perimeter of Robert's setup, taking in the scene. Folding tables with household items, handwritten price tags, a cash box, neighbors watching from porches. Nothing that looked remotely illegal or problematic. Patricia wasn't about to let the officers get distracted by actually assessing the situation. She marched up beside them, binder open again. "The regulations are very clear," she insisted. "Section 7 prohibits unsightly displays. Section 12 prohibits commercial activity. This man is flagrantly violating multiple provisions, and, as Community Standards Liaison, I have the authority to enforce these rules. When he refused to comply, I had no choice but to call you." Rodriguez pulled out his notepad, more out of habit than actual need. "Ma'am, did he threaten you in any way?" "He was dismissive and belligerent," Patricia repeated. "But did he threaten you? Yell at you? Use any aggressive language or actions?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed. "He refused to follow instructions from HOA authority." Kim rejoined them. "Ma'am, I've walked the property. Everything here appears to be a standard garage sale. The items are on private property, there's no obstruction of sidewalks or streets, and I don't see any violation of city ordinances." "This is an HOA matter," Patricia shot back. "He's violating our community standards." "Then it's a civil matter between you and the HOA," Rodriguez said, his tone patient but firm. "This isn't a criminal issue. If there's a dispute about HOA rules that needs to be resolved through your HOA board or, if necessary, civil court. We can't enforce HOA regulations." Patricia's face was getting redder. Robert could see she wasn't used to being told no, especially not by people she expected would automatically take her side. "Are you telling me you're not going to do anything?" she demanded. "We're telling you there's no crime being committed here," Kim explained. "Sergeant Hayes has a right to hold a garage sale on his own property. If you believe he's violating HOA rules, that's something you need to address through proper HOA channels." "I am the proper HOA channel," Patricia practically shouted. "I'm the Community Standards Liaison. When I tell someone they're in violation, they're in violation." Several more neighbors had come out of their houses now. Mrs. Rodriguez was definitely recording on her phone. The young couple from across the street stood on their lawn watching. Old Mr. Peterson from the corner house had pulled up a chair on his porch like he was settling in for a show. Robert remained quiet, letting the officers handle it. He could see Patricia was spiraling, getting more desperate as she realized the police weren't going to be her enforcers. "Ma'am, we've explained the situation," Rodriguez said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "No laws are being broken. We can't help you with an HOA dispute." Patricia's eyes narrowed. Then something shifted in her expression, like she'd just thought of a new angle. "Fine," she said coldly. "If you won't address the illegal commercial operation, then perhaps you should investigate where he got all these items. I have reason to believe some of this merchandise may be stolen property." The air seemed to freeze for a moment. Robert felt his jaw tighten. Rodriguez and Kim both went very still. "You have reason to believe what?" Kim asked slowly. "Stolen property," Patricia repeated, gaining confidence again. She gestured toward Robert's tables. "How does someone accumulate all of this? It's suspicious. I'm formally reporting suspected theft and requesting you investigate." Rodriguez took a deep breath through his nose. "Ma'am, are you aware that filing a false police report is itself a crime?" "I'm not filing a false report," Patricia insisted. "I'm reporting suspicious activity. It's your job to investigate, isn't it? Or are you going to refuse to do your job again?" Robert had stayed quiet through most of this, but now he saw an opportunity. Patricia had just crossed a line, and maybe it was time to teach her a lesson she'd actually remember. "Officers," Robert said calmly, "if Ms. Cunningham believes there's stolen property here, maybe we should take her accusation seriously. Perhaps this does warrant a proper investigation." Patricia's face lit up, thinking she'd finally won. "Exactly. Do your job and investigate." Rodriguez caught the look in Robert's eye, and Robert could see the understanding dawn. A tiny smile threatened to break through Rodriguez's professional expression. "Ma'am, if you're officially accusing Sergeant Hayes of possessing stolen property, we'll need to take a formal statement from you," Rodriguez said, pulling out his notepad for real this time. "Can you identify which specific items you believe are stolen?" Patricia hesitated for just a second, but she'd backed herself into a corner. "All of it looks suspicious." "All of it?" Kim asked. "Can you be more specific? Do you recognize any of these items as having been reported stolen? Have you seen these items before? What exactly makes you believe they're stolen?" "It's just obvious," Patricia stammered. "The quantity, the variety, the fact that he's selling them so cheap." "So you don't have any specific evidence?" Rodriguez pressed. "You haven't seen police reports about these items? No one has reported them missing to you?" "I'm reporting them to you now," Patricia shot back. "It's your job to figure out where they came from." Robert pulled out his phone. "You know what? If there's a question about stolen property, we should probably handle this properly. Mind if I make a call?" "Who are you calling?" Patricia demanded. "Some colleagues who can investigate this thoroughly," Robert said, already dialing. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Detective Walsh." "Hey, Amanda, it's Robert. Sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but I've got a situation that might need your expertise." Patricia looked confused. Rodriguez and Kim were now both clearly fighting back smiles. "I'm at my house having a garage sale," Robert continued. "A neighbor has just officially accused me of possessing stolen property and requested a police investigation. Can you and whoever's on call come down and handle this properly?" There was a pause on the other end. Then Detective Amanda Walsh's voice came back, carefully controlled. "Someone accused you of fencing stolen goods at your garage sale?" "That's correct. And they want this investigated officially?" She was very insistent. Another pause. Robert could practically hear Amanda trying not to laugh. "We'll be there in 20 minutes." Robert ended the call and looked at Patricia, who was starting to look less confident. "Detectives are on their way. They'll want to get your full statement about what you believe is stolen and why." "Detectives?" Patricia's voice had lost some of its edge. "Well, you accused someone of theft," Kim said. "That's a serious allegation. It needs to be investigated properly." Patricia looked around. More neighbors had gathered. Everyone was watching. She'd made such a big show of calling the police, of being right, of having authority. Now she was trapped in her own accusation. Maybe I was hasty, she said quietly. You want to withdraw your accusation? Rodriguez asked. Patricia's hands clutched her binder tighter. She looked at Robert, at the officers, at all the neighbors watching. Her pride wouldn't let her back down, not completely, not in front of everyone. No, she said, lifting her chin. I stand by what I said. If he has nothing to hide, an investigation shouldn't be a problem. Robert just nodded. Then we'll wait for the detectives. 20 minutes. That's all it would take for this to get very interesting. Patricia had no idea what she'd just set in motion. She stood there at the end of the driveway, still clutching her binder, still believing somehow that this was going to end with her being proven right. Robert went back to his tables and straightened up some books, completely calm. Rodriguez and Kim stayed nearby, officially waiting for the detectives to arrive, unofficially making sure this didn't escalate further. The neighborhood had gone completely quiet except for the sound of birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Patricia checked her watch, smoothed her hair, adjusted her blazer. She was trying to look confident, but Robert could see the tiny cracks starting to form, the way she kept shifting her weight, the way her grip on that binder had gone from authoritative to white-knuckled. She had no idea who she just challenged, and she was about to find out. The 20 minutes felt like an hour. Patricia had moved from the end of the driveway to leaning against her BMW, trying to look casual but failing miserably. She kept checking her phone, scrolling through something but clearly not actually reading it, just keeping her hands busy. Robert noticed she'd stopped making eye contact with anyone. The neighbors were still watching. Some had brought out lawn chairs, a few had coffee. This had become the morning's entertainment. Mrs. Rodriguez had actually walked over at one point and bought a set of dishes, counting out her cash slowly and deliberately, making sure Patricia saw that the garage sale was still happening despite all the drama. It was a small act of solidarity that made Robert smile. Then an unmarked sedan pulled up, dark blue, the kind of car that screamed detective even without any official markings. Two people got out, Detective Amanda Walsh and Detective Louise Park. Robert had worked with both of them for years. Amanda was in her late 30s, sharp as a razor, with a reputation for getting confessions from people who swore they'd never talk. Louise was the calm counterpart, methodical and detail-oriented, the kind of detective who'd spend 12 hours reviewing security footage and somehow spot the one frame that cracked the case. They walked up with professional expressions, carrying notepads and wearing their badges on their belts. To anyone watching who didn't know better, this looked like a serious investigation about to unfold. Sergeant Hayes, Amanda said, her tone formal and official. We received a report about possible stolen property at this location. That's correct, Robert replied, matching her professional tone. Ms. Cunningham made the report. She's right over there. Both detectives turned to look at Patricia, who suddenly stood up straighter and tried to compose herself back into the confident persona she'd had earlier. Ms. Cunningham? Louise said, walking over to her. I'm Detective Park, this is Detective Walsh. We understand you've made a report about stolen property. Can we get your statement? Patricia clutched her binder. Yes, I reported suspicious items being sold here. The quantity and nature of the merchandise raised concerns. Amanda pulled out her notepad, pen ready. Can you be specific about which items you believe are stolen? Well, all of it seems suspicious. All of it? Amanda repeated, looking over at the tables full of furniture, books, kitchen items, and various household goods. That's quite an accusation. Can you identify any specific items that you've seen reported as stolen? Have you witnessed any thefts? Do you have information about where these items came from? Patricia's confidence wavered. I don't have specific information, but the situation is clearly unusual. What makes it unusual? Louis asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. The amount of items, the prices, the whole setup. So you're saying a garage sale with a lot of items at garage sale prices is suspicious? Louise clarified. When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous, but we're just trying to understand the basis of your report. Amanda interrupted smoothly. When you called the police and accused Mr. Hayes of possessing stolen property, what specific evidence were you basing that on? The word accused hung in the air. Patricia seemed to realize for the first time that she hadn't just made a casual suggestion. She'd made an official accusation that was now being investigated by detectives who were writing down everything she said. I was concerned about community standards. Patricia tried to redirect. As the HOA liaison, it's my responsibility to— Ma'am, we're not investigating HOA violations, Amanda said firmly. We're investigating your claim that property here is stolen. That's a serious criminal accusation, so I need you to tell me specifically what makes you believe any of these items are stolen. Patricia looked around. All the neighbors were watching. Rodriguez and Kim stood off to the side, observing. Robert was at his tables, arms crossed, waiting. She'd backed herself into a corner and was realizing she couldn't get out. Perhaps I was mistaken, she said quietly. You're withdrawing your report? Luis asked. I'm saying maybe I jumped to conclusions. Amanda exchanged a look with Luis, then turned back to Patricia. Ms. Cunningham, do you understand that filing a false police report is a criminal offense? Making accusations without any basis can have legal consequences. Patricia's face went pale. I didn't file a false report. I had concerns. Concerns based on what exactly? Amanda pressed. You called 911, officers responded. You specifically accused Mr. Hayes of possessing stolen property and demanded an investigation. We're here investigating, but you can't point to a single item that you actually believe is stolen, or provide any evidence whatsoever to support your accusation. From where I'm standing, that looks like a false report. I want to speak to your supervisor, Patricia said, trying to regain some authority. That can be arranged, Luis said calmly. But right now we're in the middle of investigating your report. Let's finish this first. You stated you had reason to believe items here were stolen. Walk us through the tables and point out which specific items concerned you. Patricia didn't move. She just stood there, realizing she was completely trapped. Amanda turned to Robert. Mr. Hayes, can you provide proof of ownership for the items you're selling? Robert nodded. Most of this stuff I've had for years. I can show you receipts for the bigger items. I've got photos of my house showing the furniture in place over time, and I'm sure my neighbors can confirm they've seen these things. That won't be necessary, Mrs. Rodriguez called out from her porch. I've been to Robert's house plenty of times. That couch has been in his living room for at least 10 years. The coffee table I just bought has been on his porch every summer since he moved in. Anyone in this neighborhood can tell you this is all his stuff. Several other neighbors chimed in with agreement. The young couple across the street confirmed they'd helped Robert move that weight bench into his garage 3 years ago. Old Mr. Peterson mentioned he'd borrowed the gardening tools Robert was selling just last spring. Amanda wrote all of this down, making a show of documenting everything. Then she turned back to Patricia. So we have the homeowner with documentation. We have multiple witnesses confirming ownership. And we have you with no specific evidence of any theft. Ms. Cunningham, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you make this accusation because you actually believed property was stolen? Or did you make it because the officers wouldn't shut down his garage sale? Patricia's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because if it's the latter, Amanda continued, that's misuse of emergency services and filing a false report. Both are criminal offenses. I think we should look at this from a different angle, Luis said, his tone still calm but with an edge to it. Ms. Cunningham, have you made similar reports before? Have you called the police on other neighbors? I maintain community standards, Patricia said defensively. That's not what I asked. Have you called the police on other neighbors for issues that weren't actually criminal matters? Patricia didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. Luis looked at Amanda. Might be worth interviewing the neighbors. See if there's a pattern of harassment here. Harassment? Patricia finally found her voice. I haven't harassed anyone. I'm enforcing HOA rules. By calling 911 and making false accusations? Amanda raised an eyebrow. That goes beyond enforcing HOA rules, ma'am. Rodriguez stepped forward. For what it's worth, detectives, this is the third call we've responded to in this neighborhood in the past 6 months involving Ms. Cunningham. One was about someone parking a work van overnight. One was about kids playing basketball making too much noise. Now this. None of those were crimes either. Luis asked. No, sir. All HOA disputes that got called in as emergencies. Amanda wrote that down too, very deliberately, making sure Patricia saw her recording it. Repeated false emergency calls. Misuse of emergency services. Pattern of harassment. This is starting to look pretty serious. Patricia's carefully constructed authority had completely crumbled. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the pavement. What do you want from me? The truth, Amanda said simply. Did you actually believe any of this property was stolen? A long pause. Patricia stared at the ground. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. No. So you made a false accusation? I was trying to get him to shut down the sale. The police wouldn't help me, so I thought if I said the items might be stolen. You thought they'd have to investigate and shut him down anyway. Louise finished. That's exactly what filing a false report is. Patricia looked like she might cry. All her arrogance, all her confidence, all her self-righteous authority had evaporated. She was just someone who'd made a very big mistake and was realizing there might be real consequences. Here's what's going to happen, Amanda said, her voice firm but not cruel. We're going to document all of this. The false report, the admission, the pattern of misusing emergency services. Then we're going to have a conversation with the district attorney's office about whether charges should be filed. Charges? Patricia's voice cracked. You wasted police resources. You made false accusations against a citizen. You admitted to doing it intentionally. Yes, charges are possible. Patricia looked at Robert desperately, like he might somehow save her. Robert just looked back, his expression neutral. He'd said maybe 3 sentences this entire time, letting Patricia dig her own hole deeper and deeper. However, Louise said, that decision isn't up to us. The DA will consider various factors. Whether the accused wants to press charges, whether there's any willingness to make things right, whether this is likely to happen again. Patricia turned to Robert fully now. Please, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Please don't press charges. Robert let the silence stretch out for a moment. Let her sit with the consequences of her actions. Then he spoke. I think we need to have a serious conversation about how this neighborhood operates and your role in it. But that's a conversation that involves more than just you and me. Amanda looked at the growing crowd of neighbors. Actually, since we're investigating a pattern of harassment, it would be helpful to get statements from other residents. Anyone who's had issues with Ms. Cunningham making excessive complaints or misusing emergency services, we'd like to hear from you. At least 6 hands went up immediately. Patricia looked around in shock, seeing just how many people she'd antagonized with her behavior. The detectives spent the next 40 minutes interviewing neighbors. One by one, people came forward with stories about Patricia's behavior over the past few years. It was like opening a floodgate that had been building pressure for way too long. Mrs. Rodriguez went first. She explained how Patricia had called the police on her son last year for working on his car in the driveway. Claimed it was a commercial auto repair operation when the kid was literally just changing his own oil. The officers who responded had been annoyed at having their time wasted. Patricia had then tried to fine them $300 for automotive repair services in a residential zone. The young couple from across the street shared their story. They'd put up Christmas lights in November, apparently 2 weeks before the HOA approved date. Patricia had sent them a cease and desist letter, threatened daily fines, and when they didn't take the lights down immediately, she'd called code enforcement. The city inspector who showed up told them there was no law about when you could put up Christmas decorations, and that they should take it up with their HOA board, not waste city resources. Old Mr. Peterson had the longest list. Patricia had complained about his lawn being patchy, his mailbox being the wrong shade of beige, his newspaper delivery happening too early in the morning and being noisy, and his grandkids visiting too often and parking on the street. He'd lived in this neighborhood for 32 years, and according to him, the last 4 years since Patricia became community standards liaison had been the worst. A woman from 3 houses down talked about how Patricia had tried to fine her for having a vegetable garden in her front yard, said it was agricultural use and violated residential standards. The woman had to threaten legal action to get Patricia to back off. Another neighbor mentioned Patricia had called animal control on his dog for barking, except the dog wasn't even barking. It was sleeping in the backyard. Patricia had apparently just decided she didn't like the fact that he had a dog. Detective Walsh wrote everything down, filling page after page in her notepad. Detective Park was recording voice memos on his phone with each person's permission. Patricia stood next to her BMW, watching her reputation get dismantled piece by piece in front of the entire neighborhood. What struck Robert most wasn't just the number of complaints. It was how relieved everyone seemed to finally be able to talk about it. Like they'd all been dealing with this individually, not realizing how many others were going through the same thing. Patricia had ruled through intimidation and threats, making everyone think they were alone in their frustration. After the interviews, Amanda and Louise huddled together for a few minutes reviewing their notes. Patricia watched them nervously, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She'd tried to leave once, but Luis had politely informed her that they weren't done, and she needed to stay available for further questioning. Finally, the detectives walked back over to where Robert stood by his garage sale tables. "That's quite a pattern," Amanda said, loud enough that Patricia could hear. "Multiple instances of false emergency calls, harassment of neighbors, abuse of position, misuse of city resources. The DA is going to have a field day with this." Patricia took a step forward. "Please, I said I was sorry. What more do you want?" Luis turned to face her. "Ms. Cunningham, do you understand the seriousness of what you've done? Not just today, but repeatedly over several years. You've wasted countless hours of police time. You've harassed your neighbors. You've used your HOA position as a weapon against people who were just trying to live their lives." "I was enforcing the rules," Patricia said weakly. "No," Amanda corrected. "You are using the rules as an excuse to control people. There's a difference. Real community standards are about maintaining a nice neighborhood. What you've been doing is about power and control." Patricia looked down at her shoes. The fight had completely left her. She wasn't the confident, authoritative figure who'd marched up Robert's driveway 2 hours ago. She was someone who'd finally been called out and had no defense left. Robert had been quiet through most of this, letting the detectives handle it, but now he spoke up. "Can I ask you something, Patricia?" His tone wasn't angry or mocking.
Just genuinely curious. Why?
"Why does it matter so much to you if someone has a garage sale, or puts up Christmas lights early, or has a vegetable garden? How does any of that actually affect you?" Patricia didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was different, smaller. "I worked so hard to get this position. I thought if I enforced the rules strictly, people would respect me. The neighborhood would be perfect. Property values would go up. I thought I was helping. But nobody asked for that kind of help," Mrs. Rodriguez called out from her porch. "We wanted a nice neighborhood where we could live without someone breathing down our necks about every little thing. Did you ever actually read the complaints people filed about you with the HOA board?" Robert asked. Patricia looked up confused. "What complaints?" "You don't know?" Robert pulled out his phone and opened his email. "I sent one 3 months ago. Copied the entire board, about your harassment over my grass being slightly long. I wasn't the only one. There are dozens of complaints about you in the HOA system." Patricia's face showed genuine shock. "I never saw any complaints." "That's because the board president has been sitting on them," Mr. Peterson said, walking closer. "I talked to him last month. He said he didn't want to deal with the drama of removing you, so he was just ignoring the complaints and hoping people would forget about it." "So, you had no idea that people were formally complaining?" Luis asked Patricia. She shook her head slowly. "No one ever said anything to my face. I thought people just needed stricter enforcement. I thought I was doing the right thing." Amanda looked at Robert, then back at Patricia. "Here's the reality of your situation. We have documented evidence of multiple false police reports, harassment, and misuse of emergency services. That's enough for criminal charges. The DA could prosecute, and honestly, given the pattern, you'd probably be convicted." Patricia looked like she might be sick. "However," Luis continued, "Sergeant Hayes here is the primary victim in today's incident, and his preference will carry weight with the DA's office. If he doesn't want to press charges, it makes prosecution harder. Not impossible, but harder." Everyone looked at Robert. This was the moment where he could either destroy Patricia completely or show some mercy. He'd dealt with enough criminals over the years to know the difference between someone who was malicious to the core and someone who'd gotten drunk on a tiny amount of power and made terrible decisions. Patricia seemed like the latter. "I don't want to press charges," Robert said finally, "but I have conditions." Patricia looked up, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in an hour. "First, you write a formal apology. Not just to me, but to every person who's here today, and it gets distributed to the entire HOA. A real apology that acknowledges what you did wrong." Patricia nodded quickly. "Yes, I can do that." "Second, you resign from any enforcement role in the HOA, immediately. You can still live here. You can still be a member, but you don't get to enforce rules or threaten people anymore." "Okay," Patricia whispered. "Third, you attend at least 6 sessions with a counselor or therapist. Because this behavior isn't normal, and you need to figure out why you felt the need to control everyone around you." Patricia blinked back tears. I'll do it. And fourth, Robert's voice got firmer. If you ever pull anything like this again with anyone in this neighborhood or anywhere else, I will personally make sure every single one of these documented incidents gets handed to the DA with a recommendation for maximum prosecution. This is your one chance. Don't waste it. I won't, Patricia said. I promise I won't. Amanda looked at Louise, who nodded. All right, Amanda said. We'll document this agreement. Ms. Cunningham, you'll need to come down to the station next week to sign a formal statement. We'll keep all of this on file. If there are any future incidents, this becomes Exhibit A. I understand, Patricia said quietly. You're free to go, Louise told her. But I'd suggest you start writing those apologies. Patricia walked to her BMW like someone leaving a funeral. She got in, started the engine, and drove away slowly. Nobody waved. Nobody said goodbye. They just watched her leave. After she was gone, the neighborhood seemed to exhale collectively. The tension that had been building for hours finally released. Mrs. Rodriguez started clapping. Then the young couple joined in. Then Mr. Peterson. Soon the whole gathered crowd was applauding, not for Patricia leaving, but for finally standing up to her, for finally ending years of unnecessary stress and harassment. Robert felt embarrassed by the attention. I was just having a garage sale, he said. You did more than that, Mr. Peterson said, walking over and shaking Robert's hand. You stood up to her when the rest of us were too tired or scared to fight. You gave us all our neighborhood back. Amanda and Louise packed up their notes. That was interesting, Amanda said to Robert quietly. Not how I expected to spend my Saturday. Sorry about that, Robert replied. Don't be. That was actually pretty satisfying. She grinned. Not often we get to scare someone straight without actually filing charges. Think she'll stick to the agreement? Robert watched the spot where Patricia's BMW had been. Yeah, I think she will. She's not a bad person, just someone who got way too caught up in having authority. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom to realize they've been going the wrong direction. Very philosophical for a detective sergeant, Louis said with a smile. I have my moments. The detectives left, and the neighbors slowly dispersed, but they didn't go home quietly. They lingered, chatting with each other, some for the first time in years. Robert's garage sale suddenly picked back up, with people buying things more out of solidarity than actual need. The young couple bought the couch set. Mr. Peterson grabbed the gardening tools. Even Mrs. Rodriguez came back for some kitchen items. By early afternoon, Robert had sold almost everything. As he packed up the last few items, he realized this had turned into something bigger than just a garage sale. It had become a neighborhood moment, a turning point. Sometimes standing your ground wasn't about being right. It was about showing others that it was okay to push back against unreasonable authority. His phone buzzed. A text from Captain Morrison at the station. Heard you had an interesting morning. Everything okay? Robert smiled and typed back, all good. Just a typical Saturday garage sale. The next few days were surprisingly quiet. Robert went back to work Monday morning expecting some kind of fallout from the weekend incident, but his captain just gave him a knowing look and said, Heard you had an eventful garage sale. That was it. No paperwork, no formal inquiry, nothing. The incident had been handled, documented, and filed away. What Robert didn't expect was how much the neighborhood would change. Tuesday evening, he came home to find Mrs. Rodriguez and 3 other neighbors standing in his driveway. For a moment he worried something was wrong, but they were all smiling. We need to talk to you about the HOA, Mrs. Rodriguez said. They explained that they'd called an emergency HOA board meeting. Turns out when neighbors actually started talking to each other about Patricia's behavior, they realized just how dysfunctional the whole HOA had become. The board president who'd been ignoring complaints, 4 families were already circulating a petition to remove him. They wanted Robert to consider joining the board. I appreciate the offer, Robert said, but I work 60-hour weeks. I don't have time to manage HOA stuff. We're not asking you to manage anything, one of the other neighbors explained. We just want someone on the board who'll actually stand up to unreasonable nonsense. Someone who won't let another Patricia situation happen. You wouldn't have to do much. Just show up to meetings once a month and keep things honest. Robert thought about it. He really didn't have the time or energy for HOA politics. But he also remembered how relieved everyone had looked when Patricia finally left. How years of frustration had been building because nobody wanted to rock the boat. Let me think about it, he said. Wednesday morning, Robert got an email. It was from Patricia, and attached was a document titled Formal Apology to the Neighborhood. He almost deleted it without reading, assuming it would be some half-hearted excuse filled with justifications. But curiosity got the better of him. The apology was 3 pages long, and it was genuine. Patricia didn't make excuses. She acknowledged every incident that neighbors had brought up. She admitted that she'd been using the HOA rules as a way to feel important and in control, and that she'd been wrong. She talked about how she'd grown up in a chaotic household and had spent her adult life trying to create order and structure, but had taken it way too far. She explained that she'd already scheduled her first therapy appointment and had formally resigned from all HOA positions. She ended by saying she understood if people couldn't forgive her, but she was committed to being a better neighbor going forward. Robert forwarded the email to Detective Walsh with a note. "Looks like she's taking it seriously," Amanda replied within an hour. "Good, we'll keep monitoring. She comes in Friday to sign her statement. I'll let you know how it goes." Thursday evening, Robert was grilling dinner in his backyard when he heard his doorbell. He walked around front to find the young couple from across the street, the ones who'd bought his couch. "Hey, sorry to bother you," the guy said. "We just wanted to say thanks again. Not just for the furniture, but for what you did Saturday. We've been living here for 2 years, and honestly, we were thinking about moving because of Patricia. She made everything so stressful. Now it feels like we can actually relax in our own neighborhood." His girlfriend nodded. "We're having a little cookout this weekend if you want to stop by. Just neighbors getting together. Nothing formal." "I'd like that," Robert said, and he meant it. Friday afternoon, Robert got a text from Amanda. "Patricia came in. Signed everything. Seems genuinely remorseful. Asked about you. Wanted to know if you'd received her apology. I think your conditions might actually stick." Robert replied, "Time will tell." That weekend, Robert went to the neighborhood cookout. It was in the young couple's backyard, and about 15 people showed up. Nothing fancy, just burgers and hot dogs and people actually talking to each other. Mr. Peterson brought his famous potato salad. Mrs. Rodriguez made her homemade salsa. Someone else brought a speaker and played music. At one point, standing there with a paper plate and listening to neighbors laugh and share stories, Robert realized this was what a neighborhood was supposed to feel like. Not a place where everyone walked on eggshells worried about breaking obscure rules. Just people living near each other, being friendly, helping out when needed. "You going to join the board?" Mr. Peterson asked, appearing next to him with a burger. "Still thinking about it," Robert admitted. "Let me tell you something," the old man said. "I've lived through 4 different HOA boards in 3 decades here. The best ones weren't the people who knew all the rules or wanted to enforce everything strictly. They were the ones who just wanted everyone to get along and were willing to tell busybodies to back off when needed. You're that person." "I'll really think about it," Robert said, and this time he meant he'd probably say yes. Monday morning, Robert was at his desk reviewing case files when his phone rang. "Unknown number. Sergeant Hayes," he answered. "Hi, this is Patricia Cunningham." Her voice was quiet, uncertain, nothing like the authoritative tone from the garage sale. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from the HOA directory." Robert leaned back in his chair. "What can I do for you, Patricia?" "I just wanted to tell you in person, or I guess by phone, that I'm sorry. I know you got my written apology, but I needed to say it directly. What I did was completely out of line. I wasted your Saturday. I harassed you for months before that, and I made a false accusation that could have caused real problems for you. There's no excuse for any of it." Robert didn't respond immediately. He'd heard a lot of apologies over the years, many of them hollow. This one sounded real. "I appreciate you saying that," he finally said. "I had my first therapy session," Patricia continued. "The counselor helped me understand that I've been using control as a coping mechanism. When my life feels chaotic, I try to control everything around me. The HOA position gave me the authority to do that, and I absolutely abused it. I'm working on it. That's good, Patricia. That's a good first step. I know I can't undo the damage I did. I know people are going to avoid me, and I deserve that. But I wanted you to know that I'm not just doing the therapy and apologies because you required it. I'm doing it because I finally see how wrong I was. So thank you for stopping me before I did something even worse, for giving me conditions instead of just pressing charges. You could have destroyed my life, and you chose not to." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Robert said, "but only one. Don't make me regret giving you this one." "I won't. I promise I won't." After she hung up, Robert sat at his desk for a few minutes thinking. In his line of work, he usually dealt with people after they'd done something terrible and weren't sorry at all. It was refreshing in a way to see someone actually take responsibility and try to change. That evening, Robert drafted an email to Mrs. Rodriguez and the others who'd asked him to join the HOA board. He said yes, with one condition. They needed to completely rewrite the enforcement policies. No more threats and fines as the first response to everything. More communication, more reasonableness, more focus on community than rules. They agreed immediately. The next HOA meeting was the following Tuesday. Robert showed up not really knowing what to expect. The meeting room at the community center was packed. Way more people than usually attended. Word had spread about the changes coming. The board president who'd been ignoring complaints had already resigned, apparently deciding to quit before he got pushed out. A woman named Helen Rodriguez, Mrs. Rodriguez's sister-in-law, had been elected as the new president. She started the meeting by acknowledging that the HOA had become too focused on enforcement and not enough on community. "We're making changes," Helen announced, "starting with our approach to violations. From now on, the first step is always a friendly conversation, not a threatening letter. We're neighbors, not adversaries." There was applause, actual applause at an HOA meeting. They voted to revise several rules that had been overly restrictive. Garage sales were explicitly allowed 4 times per year instead of 2. Christmas decorations could go up any time after Thanksgiving. Front yard gardens were permitted as long as they were maintained. The revision list went on. Robert was officially voted onto the board, along with 2 other neighbors who'd been vocal about wanting change. His role was specifically designated as community liaison, which basically meant he was there to be the voice of reason when things got too bureaucratic. At the end of the meeting, Helen brought up Patricia's resignation and apology. "I think we all know what happened," she said carefully. "Patricia has resigned, apologized, and as far as I'm concerned, that chapter is closed. If she wants to remain part of this community respectfully, she should be allowed to do that without ongoing harassment. We're supposed to be better than that." There were murmurs of agreement. People were willing to move on. Over the next few months, the neighborhood continued to change. More cookouts happened. People who'd barely spoken to each other started having conversations. Kids played basketball in driveways without worrying about noise complaints. Someone started a neighborhood group chat that was actually friendly, instead of just being a place for complaints. Robert even saw Patricia a few times. She'd wave politely from a distance, never approaching or trying to insert herself into conversations. She seemed to understand that rebuilding trust would take time. Once he saw her helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, not making a show of it, just quietly helping. Maybe the therapy was working. 6 months after the garage sale incident, Robert was leaving for work one morning when he found a card in his mailbox. Inside was a handwritten note from Patricia. 6 months sober from being a control freak, it read. "Thank you for the intervention I desperately needed. The neighborhood is better and so am I. Patricia." Robert smiled and tucked the card in his pocket. He thought about his job, about all the cases that ended badly, all the people who never changed, all the situations that couldn't be fixed. It was nice for once to see something actually work out. That weekend, he decided to have another garage sale. He'd accumulated more stuff over the months, and besides, the last one had been interrupted. This time it went perfectly. No drama, no confrontations, just neighbors stopping by, making deals, chatting about life. Mrs. Rodriguez bought a lamp. The young couple from across the street grabbed some books. Mr. Peterson picked up a tool set. Even Patricia walked by at one point, though she didn't stop. She just gave a small nod of acknowledgement and kept walking. That felt about right. As Robert packed up at the end of the day, counting his modest earnings and feeling satisfied with clearing out more clutter, he realized something. That garage sale 6 months ago hadn't just been about teaching Patricia a lesson. It had been about showing an entire neighborhood that they didn't have to accept unreasonable authority, that they could push back, that they could create the kind of community they actually wanted to live in. Sometimes the smallest acts of standing your ground could create the biggest changes. All it took was one person willing to say no to something wrong, and suddenly everyone else found their courage too. Robert locked up his empty tables and went inside. Tomorrow he'd be back to being a detective, dealing with complicated cases and difficult people. But tonight he was just a guy who'd had a successful garage sale in a neighborhood that finally felt like home.